All right, back as always, we are the ThunderCast, and I'd like to, of course, welcome my reoccurring cast members. Number one, Marmaduke fan.
Thanks for having me on. I will not mention the annoying taboo topics.
I will hurt you. And we've got Pella Creepy.
Hey, it's great to be back. We got fun episodes to talk about.
All right, now let me know, guys, if you can't hear any of us or there's a problem because sometimes Streamlabs gets a little bit goofy. So let me see here, checking all the other stuff, co-hosts. Go ahead and talk, guys.
Well, Mark, I'm kind of interested in your thoughts on the practical effect from Safari Joe, like where Lion-O is trying to see through the interference, and it's just like a bunch of haze. Because I thought that looks like they used glass or something. Like they must have used some kind of physical, I don't know, like practical effect to make something like that. Do you know
Notice
much
that.
about?
So I know that. So when it comes to camera work back then, I know that they did a lot of. They would outsource it. Actually, optical effects would be outsourced. So Pacific Animation wouldn't do those effects themselves, or like Toei on like Transformers.
Yeah.
They would subcontract another animation studio just to do special optical effects.
Huh.
And I think it was in the second episode we watched, like Snarf justifies himself, the episode,
Yeah.
where Castle Plundar, Vultureman is putting that like rainbow polka dot ray to drag in the Thunder Kittens on their hoverboards. Like that's a crazy optical effect of like bright lights and the strobing blinking colors. Like that's not something Pacific would have done in house. That's the kind of thing they would have outsourced to and or subcontracted for. Uh, but when it comes to the actual like how did they do it, man, I don't know. So in camera effects and old school optical effects are practically like movie magic. Like Don Bluth and his backlighting effects.
Yeah.
I've seen how those are done, but they're amazing and they're incredibly complicated. You ever see
Nerds!
nerds? Yeah. You ever see Rock and Roll, that old Nelvana movie?
No, I haven't
Oh
yet.
my
I think
god, rock and
someone
roll.
put it on YouTube, didn't they?
It's so good. But they what Nelvana did for this monster that appears at the end of the movie, it's got kind of a Lovecraftian thing where the guy Mock, who's the villain, is trying to summon this monster from another dimension. And when it shows up, it's animated in a completely different style from all the other characters, so it looks otherworldly.
Huh.
And it's just this morphing blob monster demon thing. And the way they did it was they smeared cow brains on the camera lens, one frame at a time, and then smudged the cow brains around, and it creates this gory, goopy visual monster that's transparent because the light's going through it, and it's incredible to look at.
Huh.
But like how they would think to do that, how they would actually pull that off, I don't know.
That's
Okay,
like some Hannibal Lecter stuff right there.
Yeah.
all right, with that fun out of the way, let's go ahead and get into some of the news here. Since this weekend is Toy Fair, I figured I'd go ahead and cover this shortly. I'll do a full video of it hopefully later tonight, maybe tomorrow, concerning some of the reveals at Toy Fair. So let me go ahead and throw some of these up on screen. Firstly, we're starting with the Classics Chitara for the Super 7 run. These are Thundercat Ultimates. Chitara here seems to come with the open and closed version of the Locket of Lies, Snarf's animal control flute from the Treasure of Thundera, and the Mirror of Truth, several different hands, and a few different versions of the bow staff. Following her, and let me go ahead and do this real quick so you guys don't have to wait, specifically the guys here in the chat, because there is a difference in time. So
Yeah, I've seen it come up now on this live stream.
here's Chitara. Now we're going to go ahead and move into how Jaga's going to look.
Nice.
Now, I will say Super 7 has a bad habit of, unfortunately, never getting colors correct. So maybe, hopefully, these will all be color corrected before they come out. Jaga specifically, if you take a good look at him, his cape, leotard, basically nothing's the right color. It's a mess, and hopefully they will fix it. Up next, the biggest color issue we have is Slide. For some reason, they
Yeah.
gave his undercolor a grayish
It's
tone.
like blue gray. It's really blue, actually. It's way off.
And it's
I
funny.
mean, it's almost like
Go ahead.
yeah. Go on.
No, you go ahead.
I was saying it's almost like they were looking at screenshots of the episode, but they weren't taking like lighting into account. So that's what Sly's colors would look like, if it was a night shot or if he was in a cave. Maybe that's why his underbelly would be that dark blue gray, but that's not what it's supposed to be.
Yes, I'm guessing they're just looking up on Google. John Caulfield has been holding up with me on my next video. Work, not feeling well, and having a lot of other stuff to do. Unfortunately, YouTube's not exactly my full-time job. But let's see here. Slide is a bigger issue because also, I'll show you why in a little bit here, but it's funny because they can get his coloring right in other things. But moving on is the fourth piece of this specific wave, because it's a third wave now. Captain Cracker. Of all the characters, they have Captain Cracker following.
I don't know why they chose that one. I'm not mad that they did because I like Captain Cracker. It's just such a random choice. Like, couldn't they have done one of the Lunatics? Maybe people like the Lunatics more than Captain Cracker.
We got to make sure everybody buys all the line. But what I do like is for his little mechanical parrot, they got him 2 sets of wings, so one closed, one open. That's kind of neat.
Yeah.
But
the accessories they do are really cool for all their toys. It's just such a weird choice.
Yeah, and of course a lot of people are shrinking at the price that they need for like $45 each. But unlike the Masters line, you can't really reuse parts for Thundercats. But one thing, I'm going to go back to the Chitara here. Take a look at the packaging in the background. They're going with the original letter facing.
Huh.
And
I see that.
Yeah, and it's not just that. They're also doing it with the symbol too. Because what we're going to move into next is we're going to talk about their reaction figure line, which is basically characters in like the 3/4 scale that you would see the old school Star Wars figures in. We'll go ahead and throw that in the chat.
I like the reactions. It's kind of like they're also cross compatible. You could take your reactions, Ellen Ripley, and have her pilot a TIE fighter if you wanted to. I kind of love all that.
Yeah, that's the appeal. But what I find interesting here is when you actually look at Sly there, they got his color right.
Oh, they got his color right. So what happened with the big one?
I don't know. But we're going to go ahead and zoom in as well on the Lion-O. Because one thing I do like about reaction figures compared to other ones is I like the fact that they have brand new card art. And they're going for some form of accuracy. Because even in the card art for Sly, you can see behind Lion-O there, the card art's accurate as well.
Yep.
There's Lion-O, he has a snap-on claw shield. For some reason, they don't have the Sword of Omens displayed. But with Mum-Ra, what I like with Mum-Ra is they're doing also a nod to his original LJN figure, hence why he has the curved scimitar and the little knife for accessories. So that's kind of neat. But again,
Cool.
It's a neat thing. I don't know if I'm going to pick these up simply because I'm not big on reaction figures. I was never one of those people who I need my toys to be compatible so I can interchange them. No, just they're fine. Leave them. I'm not 5. I don't need to do that.
Now, when it says subject to licensor approval, that means they're waiting for the owners of Thundercats to give it the thumbs up before
Warner Brothers,
they can actually produce them.
Warner Brothers, yes, that is who they're
Warner
waiting
Brothers,
for.
okay.
John, that should be out tomorrow. There's one other thing I need to make sure I get done. I need to sit down and sharpen my sword, the long sword I have, before I finish number 6's review. That's also something I'm working on here. They need to hire you just to do the colors. Dude, they wouldn't hire me. I am way too mean. Let's see here. Well, yes, you're
Whoever
starting.
did the card art, they did a really good job, especially the coloring style. It reminds me of the FHE box covers for the VHSs, the way they would color the characters.
Oh yeah, those were always really neat. But that's what we have in terms of Toy Fair news. So we're going to go ahead now and step into the normal thing that we discuss. So we're going to move on to the episode of Safari Joe. Oh, clicked on the wrong thing. Aha! Lio Convoy does it again!
Exactly.
Yeah.
That episode cracks me up. I love it.
Oh, I got some fun stuff about that, but it'll have to wait until we're ready to do this. So, all right. Real quick synopsis, since that's how we got to do this. The Thundercats wind up having some clown land on Third Earth by the name of Safari Joe. And Safari Joe's purpose is he is a big game hunter. And he's set his eyes on the Thundercats as the biggest game because he's hunted Aqua Cats, Sky Cats, he's hunted them all. So now he has to hunt Thundercat, which is odd for two things. Number one, endangered species. And number two, how in the world did a British big gang hunter get out into the depths of space? But anyways, moving on. So the Thundercats have to fight him and have to try to figure out how to stop him. because he kind of puts most of them down pretty quick in the episodes. But I'll go ahead and move on to Mark. What are your thoughts on this episode?
This episode is one that I actually really liked as a kid. I thought Safari Joe was really funny. I don't think he ever came back, right? He's a one-off villain.
He comes back in a cameo on the last episode of the season, Fond Memories.
Oh, okay. Well, he had a toy in the LJN line. I remember that. But what if Teddy Roosevelt decided he wanted to kill the Thundercats? Well, let's find out. And that's what the episode is, and it's hilarious. I mean, Safari Joe in and of himself is just a funny character. I like Mule, that sidekick character he has. He has a great design where his head is like a steam engine of a train, and they use the steam coming out of his gears as a way for him to emote. And like, that's a really cool design, and the animators did a great job on that one. But I guess I'll touch on it more when we talk about the next episode. But both of these episodes that we're talking about tonight, Safari Joe and Snarf takes up the challenge. They both have the theme of all the Thundercats are really incompetent and they all get captured really easily 2 episodes in a row. So not a great showing for all the other Thundercats in these episodes. But Safari Joe, he just wrecks them. And this episode's similar to another one that comes later called The Demolisher, where it's just about jerks who come from space to beat up the Thundercats for no reason.
Any thoughts on the moral of the episode?
It's like, don't be a bully. Or that bullies are all cowards at heart, which, it's true because they pick on people that are weaker than them. And so that's kind of, it's a good moral. It's an attractive moral. I do like the ending, the climax where Lion-O turns the tables on Safari Joe and starts hunting him in the dark of the cat slayer. And they tie it together with the kick the bucket game that he was playing with Snarf.
Yeah.
Which is also a good throwback to how this is early in the series, so Lion-O is still kind of a kid at heart, a kid on the inside, so he's still kind of playing kid games with Snarf, which is sort of a cute thing that they were doing at least this early in the series. But yeah, this is I think this is what I consider a classic episode, or at least it's one of the most memorable.
How about you, Marn? What are your thoughts?
Couple little things in it. I mean, I already talked with Mark about like the kind of cool, crazy animation effects that were somehow defeating the sort of the Eye of Thundera's sight beyond sight. But I kind of liked when Wily Cat and Wily Kit were fighting at the beginning, and then when they lose their flying skateboards, they like hold hands on the way down. Like, I just thought that was a nice little, subtle way of saying, yeah, they're siblings, they fight all the time, but they love each other. And maybe something like about just the voice acting like the voice acting, I think, makes the character. I even noticed when he would do a line that wasn't Safari Joe, does it again, like he would say, he would say to the robot, "Show it to me again," and he'd do it in that same like over the top cadence. That was great. I liked the bit where he was upset at being called a bully. Like he has a sense of pride as a sportsman, so he doesn't like having his pride is insulted, and then he just like immediately like points his gun at Chitara, and then
take that back.
Right,
brave words, Chitara. Like, you didn't give her a chance to say.
The editing on that is so weird. Just kind of weird that Teddy Roosevelt, of all people, wouldn't like the word bully.
Right. Bully.
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 And Mark mentioned the Demolisher. The other, maybe kind of the interesting thing about the Demolisher is he was a bad guy, but he definitely had maybe like a sense of honor to him. Like, he didn't like like the Demolisher wants to win a fight, and Safari Joe wants to capture the Thundercats, but maybe Safari Joe is also fine using deception to do that. He's okay lying to capture capture his prey, as long as he feels like he hunted down and captured his prey. Oh, and the bit with Lion-O, like Lion-O's head game, where he like set up the claw shield as a distraction. Mm-hmm. That was great stuff. Like, he just thought a step ahead of what Safari Joe might be doing. Really, that's like the best. That's literally the best strategy you could have had in that situation, I think. So it was smart writing too.
I missed. Safari Joe never misses.
Yep, and then he still has that intensity.
All right. So, do you have any other thoughts about this episode, Marmaduke?
one of the funniest ones, definitely. I love. It's another example of how they can do almost any type of story and have any type of villain. And I don't know, like I'm glad. Safari Joe was like the one I was thinking, oh man, just let this guy go. He's too fun. Don't send him to, what is it, Mandora the Evil Chaser, please.
That is funny that at the end they didn't just call Mandora to come and haul him away. They just reprogrammed Mule to make sure he never does bad things again.
Right.
That's a weird solution.
All right, so my thoughts on the episode is this is where I like the fact that Thundercats doesn't just teach platitude morals. They try to teach morals that are functional. And unfortunately, with a lot of cartoons, even in the modern age, it's, well, a bully is just somebody that's super insecure that you should make friends with because they probably are being bullied by somebody else. Shows like this show, that is true sometimes, but sometimes you just need to punch the bully in the mouth. And with Thundercats, their response to a bully isn't, well, I'm going to sit here, I'm going to psychoanalyze you. It's like, nah, you get to piss off or you're going to get my fists in your face. And that's what's happened here. And we're going to go into what the handbook says about all this, but a few things that you need to point out here. Stephen Perry is the gentleman who wrote this episode and created Safari Joe. Unfortunately, he passed away. He passed away quite some time ago. He was murdered. Unfortunately, he was struggling. He was finally getting back on his feet, and that all happened to him. So, I wish his family the best because he's really a talented writer. And real fun thing that's probably going to be mentioned in the writing I'm about to put out. But what he had a tendency to do, because he loved his character and his catchphrase so much, he used to live in an area that behind his house was some sort of large pool, like a lake or something. What he would do when he got done with the script and was completed is he would strip down naked and run and jump in the pool while screaming, "Safari Joe does it again."
Okay.
So,
there's a visual I'll never get out of my mind's eye.
All right, so Safari Joe, written by Stephen Perry. This is what the Hero Reward says. An inspired Thundercats entry, Safari Joe not only offers a hugely original premise, but delivers an episode worthy of the concept. The idea that an intergalactic big game hunter has arrived on Third Earth to obtain his latest catch introduces not only a brilliant idea, but a truly disquieting thought for children. Safari Joe is determined to hunt down and murder our heroes for nothing more than fun. I'm a sportsman! One of the most disturbing concepts ever explored in the series. The episode is full of great moments, including the eerie side of Safari Joe's empty cages, all with the names labeling their intended victims. Stephen Perry's summary of each of the Thundercats' strengths and weaknesses is also outstanding, and we learn for the first time that Chitara can maintain her extreme speed, and perhaps even more bizarrely, Tigra can't swim when visible. There is also an amusing scene where Lion-O avoids his trap by upending the sword and using it as an improvised periscope. Not only does Perry deliver on ideas, but the character of Safari Joe is perfectly crafted. Not only is he well conceived, but he is given dialogue befitting the character, such as amusing lines such as, "Nice kitty, or I'll turn your tiger friend into a rug." We even get the great catchphrase, "Safari Joe does it again," which only helps to distinguish him from other guest villains. The climax of the episode is engaging, and the lethal game of cat and mouse between Lion-O and Safari Joe throughout the Thundercats' lair raises the stakes for our heroes. Or for our hero. It is perhaps a shame that Safari Joe would only make one fleeting return in the series, as his dark humor surely warranted further return appearances. Perhaps the only factor that detracts from this episode is Safari Joe's rather disappointing defeat. While it is an important component of the story that he shows his true colors as a coward, it is all perhaps extremely quick, and some of the earlier menace is therefore negated. Despite that, this installment of Thundercats is among the best of the offerings, and the idea that an enemy may be reestablished rather than banished or destroyed is another novel inclusion. Though his appearances would be brief, Safari Joe would rightly take his place as one of the Thundercats' greatest villains. Writer commentary from Stephen Perry. Of all the Thundercat episodes I wrote, Safari Joe is my favorite. It was the second springboard accepted by Leonard Starr, the head writer and the main show, and the show managed by Peter Lawrence, the new showrunner. It had taken me 3 weeks to write my first episode, The Doom Gaze, and there was perhaps a week or two in between the final rewrite of that and the go-ahead on Safari Joe. Safari Joe, for me, was very dear. He was a no-brainer character that while I was shocked he did not like his character design, I had described and written someone who looked quite different, I had come to accept it. You see, I used that character in other works, most notably in Time Spirits, a comic book story drawn by Al Williamson. He was called Rex Tandem in that story, but Safari Joe is Rex Tandem. Rex is how I wanted Joe to look. They even have the same tagline, Rex Tandem does it again. This is a case of me ripping off myself and getting as much mileage as something as a writer possibly can. It's cheating. But during the writing of the script for Safari Joe, I knew I had a good episode. It flowed out of me quick and easy, and the finished script was sent to animation nearly untouched. Peter Lawrence might have changed the line or two, but that was about it. The great Jim Meskimen, who had gone on to such a fabulous acting career since then, was a secondary character designer, and he designed the mule, Safari Joe's robot. Jim made the mule a train. This was completely Jim's doing. My version of Safari Joe's mule was very, very different. If I remember correctly, I had envisioned a Robbie the Robot type. I believe Jim's train mule is a case where an improvement was made, and while my Safari Joe description spoke of a handsome Jungle Jim sort of guy, that's a fun reference I'll get back to later, the bald British final form of him does speak bad guy a lot louder than my version. Safari Joe was easy for me to write, and I was very much enjoy the fact that he was a major toy in the LJN line. I recently bought a loose Safari Joe figure at a flea market, and I could not resist blurting out to the flea market dealer that I had created that character. They looked at me as if I was some sort of pathological liar from the Saturday night skit about the Liars Club. I would write hotly for 2 or 3 hour stretches and then rush out of my studio, strip naked, and throw myself into the swimming hole. Often I was yelling, "Safari Joe does it again!" When others were present, they would look at me as if I had got off my rocker, but I didn't care. I was so into the writing of Safari Joe, and it was coming to me so quickly and easily that I was excited about this to an extent that I seemed to be living on Third Earth. Much of the dialogue spoken by Safari Joe in that episode is lines I would yell to the waterfall. It was crazy. Now, I want to go ahead and touch on this. Jungle Jim, do either of you know who that character is?
I feel like I've seen like an old school comic book cover with that character, but I've never read anything with him.
How about
was he a pulp character, kind of like Doc Savage from like that same sort of era? I mean, I feel like I've heard the name, but I'm not familiar with the work.
I think so, but his toy line was handled by Mattel. And he came with a tiger in a cage. That's the same tiger mold Mattel would use a few years later for Masters of the Universe.
That's where I've heard it from. Yes, okay. Thank you.
Now, I don't know who Rex Tandem is. I don't know too much more of Stephen Perry's work, but it's a fun little jaunt that he goes on here. Safari Joe's a fascinating character, but a couple things I did like here. Lion-O upending the sword, we find out later on, isn't even necessary. But when Lion-O runs into the lair, that's basic strategy. Safari Joe knows about all the Thundercats' abilities, but he never thought to look at what the lair was like on the inside. Lion-O going into the lair, while probably not his forethought of, this is a strategic advantage, it was probably, I need cover. Lion-O knows the lair, Safari Joe doesn't. So when Safari Joe loses his only advantage, his gun, it's pretty obvious he's done.
It's a good compliment.
Knew that walking in too.
Yeah,
but he believed
he was
that.
overconfident. Yeah,
correct. All right, so
that strategy is a good compliment to Lion-O's character at that point. Like, he was still doing the childish kick the bucket game with Snarf, so he seems really immature. But then he actually has a strategy at the end that's rather, sophisticated. So it's a good character portrait for Lion-O.
All right, so let's go ahead and get into some of the comments. Eric Ehrman says that he looks like Dr. Mindbender. That's not wrong. Tim Studd asked, Joe is formidable, but how would he fare against Kraven and Stalker? I don't think he'd do well against Kraven personally, because Kraven doesn't need anything Joe does, but I don't know much about Stalker. Stalker's from Batman Beyond. Do either of you have any idea about that character?
Oh, I probably watched the cartoon years ago.
I mean, I remember him. I think he was in 2 episodes. He became a good guy in the second one.
Oh, yeah.
He was I remember he was actually really underhanded. He was probably more nasty than Safari Joe was, because he takes Terry's little brother hostage and uses him as bait to get Batman to go fight him. And I don't know, maybe Safari Joe would do that, but the show never. Thundercats obviously probably wouldn't have gone that dark. He does kidnap all of his friends, so I don't know. It seems more like Stalker was a physical fighter, and Safari Joe uses weapons. And as soon as Safari Joe is unarmed by Lion-O, he pretty much just gives up. He
and Kraven really prowls around naked in his house, trying to role-playing a lion to go kill Spider-Man.
Covers himself in spiders and all that crazy
eats them
crap.
all.
Yeah, that was a good series, though. But, yeah, it's just one thing that really unnerves me somewhat about Safari Joe in terms of big game hunter. he never really identifies the Thundercats as sentient beings. Even though he'll talk to them, he clearly regards them as less than him. Which, oof, that's a take. But let's go ahead and keep in this. How does Safari Joe compare to the Trophy Hunter from the Transformers episode Prime Target? I love that episode.
Chumley? Oh, that guy was a dumbass.
What do you know? A booby trap that actually catches boobies. I think Safari Joe is more threatening because while he does rely a lot on his tech in a way Chumley does, he's present. He doesn't rely on things to do it for him. He still shows up with his gun to do the job.
He's not like, Mule, go capture Chitara.
No.
Mule's like, what? Are you serious? But I guess we do have to point out that nothing in the ride I pointed out, but all these characters and the whole premise is all lifted from The Most Dangerous Game.
Yeah.
Which is an old novel, and it was the basis for Predator. It was a very good movie made in the 30s out of it. But yeah, it's almost like it's a trope now. It's almost a cliche to have the hunter character villain show up to hunt the hero. Obviously there's so many comparisons that people are bringing up in the chat that it's something that's kind of old hat now. But regardless of how many times it's been done, it still actually makes for fun storytelling.
All right, go ahead.
What's nice about it is it's kind of a primal thing, like the hunter and the hunted. Like you see it in nature documentaries. So I don't know. It was interesting. It was interesting to see that combined with comedy, because a lot of the other examples I can think of, there's generally like a really creepy, inhuman vibe to it. And Safari Joe is clearly just having the time of his life.
Yeah. It's almost creepier, the fact that he's having so much fun doing it,
All right, so Safari Joe has some serious insecurities, very obviously. Autobot Starscream. Safari Joe hunts all cats. Also, Safari Joe has yet to develop measures for hunting in the dark. All right. Let's see here. Tim Stunt. Well, I think it's asinine that Panthro and Safari Joe is afraid of bats. I mean, how would he fare against Batman? Will he turn tail? I think the difference is Panthro is afraid of bats, like actual animalistic bats, things that could be physical bats. I think if he sees Batman, while he might be startled at first, he'd very quickly realize bats don't tend to do roundhouse kicks at you.
Right.
And Batman still has that very strong jaw. So I don't think he'd recognize Batman as a bat I should be afraid. I think he'd see Batman like, this dude's dressing up like a bat. I can fight this. Wait, who's
I can tell the difference between a dog and a fursuiter dressed up as a dog.
Usually. Sometimes you wonder. Let's see. Autobot, who's psychoanalyzing a Thundercats character? Well, I mean, Safari Joe did, and then we do regularly. Autobot Starscream. Anime taught me that bullies need friends, and you should make friends with them by knocking their teeth and correct. Let's see. Lord Chumley. That's the name he was looking for? Let's see here. How do you think Panther would fear? Okay, Batman, well, yeah. Panther versus Man Bat might be a little bit more troublesome. Not going to deny that one. But let's go ahead and move into Snarf takes up the challenge. Let's go ahead and grab over Snarf. Where'd I put him? Aha, here he is. All right, so Mark, why don't you tell us your thoughts on this episode? You can go ahead and do the recap too if you'd like.
Well, basically, the episode actually starts kind of creepy because Snarf gets back to the cat's lair and it's completely empty and he doesn't know where anybody is. And then Robert Bill shows up and says, oh, hey, well, nobody was looking. The Thundercats were defeated. He's like, oh, well, that's contrived, but okay. And he finds out what happened to all the Thundercats. And it's so weird, this episode coming right after Safari Joe, because it's the same thing. It's all the Thundercats are off on their own, and then they do something stupid, or they fall into a trap, and they all get caught. In this case, it was Mumra just told the mutants to go out there and catch the Thundercats, and the mutants just like, oh, wow, we never thought of that. Okay, we'll just go out and catch the Thundercats. And they just go out and they do it. It's bizarre. It doesn't scan with kind of the way the mutants are the rest of the series. They're unnaturally competent in this episode where they catch all the Thundercats in a flashback. But anyway, Snarf has to go rescue the Thundercats after he finds out what happened to all of them. And then he just sneaks into Mumra's pyramid, and the Thundercats are all wrapped up in bandages while Mumra's gloating about what he's going to do with them. And Snarf just gets the Sword of Omens and cuts them free, and they all escape. There just isn't much to this episode. Most of it is just a flashback montage of how the mutants caught all the Thundercats and Snarf trying to catch up with the plot. And some of those traps are dumb. Like Lion-O sees the nosediver just sitting in the woods, and he's like, "Wow, I think I'm just gonna climb into this thing and put my head in the, in the globe on it, and
Say
see what
goodbye to your
happens."
nose
And then,
diver slide.
yeah, right. And then it just catches him.
I did like that was kind of Lion-O doing kind of a slightly unheroic thing. Like, it's totally fair in a war where they're trying to kill you to take their weapons if they leave them lying around. But like Lion-O's gonna take his bike pretty much, and that's how they get him. It kind of
And it is a childish and yeah,
Yeah.
and it is a childish, immature thing Lion-O would do, and it kind of serves him right. He's like, "Oh, you're gonna steal that dude's bike? Oh, well, you had that one coming." But then some of them are just so easy. Like, why don't the mutants do this every week? Like the
they
Thunder
put
Kittens are
Tiger's
just
face on the trap for Tigra. Interesting.
I mean, they do stuff like where they put this like weird black dodecahedron out in the middle of the forest, and the Panthro comes across it. He's like, "Oh, I wonder what this is. Oh, I'm captured." Just,
It almost would have worked better if we didn't see how it happened, like, because that's the interesting part is the creepy, like, whoa, what happened to him, right?
Yeah.
And it's kind of, it goes from creepy to humorous to campy because the way they get captured is also goofy, that it changes the tone of the episode, which kind of threw it off. And then it has to end so quickly where once Snarf catches up with the plot, he's like, "Oh shit, gotta get to the pyramid," and then then it's a race to end the episode before the credits roll. This one just didn't do it for him. The only scene that I really, really liked is when Snarf is so he has this bat creature that oddly Panther is not afraid of, that he rides to Castle Plundar up on the mutants, and the mutants are just like they're having a banquet and they're celebrating. It's like, "We finally did it! We finally did something competent.
We'll whip the
this is never gonna
willows.
happen again."
Smash the snowman.
And they never follow up on that either. Where the mutants never find out that the Thundercats escape. I'm sure they pick up on it like a week later when the Thundercats aren't imprisoned anymore. But it ends up like on a happy note, for the mutants, where the episode just ends with them thinking they've won and they're celebrating. I kind of felt good for them. You know what? You earned it. You guys earned it this time.
God, they're
I also
dumb.
like when Slythe called Jackalman a coward just because he saw something by the window. Like, they do nice little subtle things to establish that the mutants aren't all the same character. Like Jackalman is a little bit more of a, I don't know, like a skittish kind of guy, so he'd notice things like that. And Slythe's always trying to like establish his authority, right? So he's got to dunk on all the others.
He's got a dunk on Jackalman. I almost feel like that's not too hard because they give Jackalman a hard time in that show. I mean, there's one episode, I don't know if we've done it yet or we haven't gotten there, where they're in the cat's lair and one of them has to go into the vents after Snarf, and Sly's like, "Jackalman, you're the scrawniest of us. Get in there." Like, oh,
I don't think we've done that one yet.
Yeah, everyone's so mean to Jackalman. No wonder he rebelled for an episode.
Well, he probably also has cancer now, so we'll get into that later.
Yeah.
All right, so Mark, or Marm, I know you were back and forth Mark on that. Do you have any other additional thoughts to this episode?
I mean, I kind of like the way that they handled Snarf in Safari Joe better, where Snarf's heroic Snarf basically saves the day in Safari Joe, but it's a surprise at the end. The most interesting thing to me about Snarf takes up the challenge is the creepy opening. But then, as Mark said, once it becomes like really silly, then that kind of like sense of tension is gone. It's just like a quick rush to beat the villain. So I kind of like the way narratively they handled Snarf in Safari Joe, where he's part of the team, right? Like everybody does almost everybody got captured by Safari Joe, but they all kind of like did a respectable job. At least, like they'd stand up to him, or like Lion-O did a really good job of handling Safari Joe before he needed Snarf self. It's a better teamwork episode, I think.
Absolutely, this is one of those episodes where it's like He-Man will have an episode where Orko needs to save the day. Ghostbusters will have one where Slimer needs to save the day. It's that justify the sidekick character episode that's really common. And I feel like Snarf is above that. He's already, like you said in the previous episode, he already proved that he's not the sidekick. He's a part of the team. He's a Thundercat, and he contributes in every episode in ways that help resolve the conflict. He doesn't need a very special episode to convince people that he belongs. Like there's a later episode called "The Queen of Eight Legs," where all the Thundercats get captured by this giant spider, and Snarf saves the day. He catches the Sword of Omens and he throws it at Lion-O, and Lion-O uses it to cut himself free. But the episode doesn't make a big deal about it. It's just he just plays his role in the fight, and they rely on Snarf the same way they rely on Panthro and Tigro and the rest of the team. He's above being a sidekick or needing episodes like this.
So ultimately, you guys' view is that this episode somewhat superfluous.
I mean, it's one of those silly, corny fun episodes. It's not the one that I would be like, oh yes, I get to watch this episode again. But it cracked me up, definitely.
Well, Safari Joe's a tough act to follow. I mean, really.
Yeah.
True, but my thoughts on the episode are basically that while it might be somewhat superfluous, I thoroughly believe Snarf did need an episode to shine a highlight on his capabilities and what he is able to do. And it's like the Unicorn Keepers were talking about. It's like, well, Snarf, don't you have talents? You can rely on those. Because first he's worried because, like, I don't have, and he lists off the Thundercats abilities. I don't have that. I'm just Snarf. So we find out some new things about Snarf, that he is able to communicate with other animals. Which, I hate to say it, that's a pretty OP power. Like, that's Aquaman for everything. So I find it interesting how they utilize it. The fact that they never touch back on it further, but Mum-Ra's pyramid is part technological. We never really figure out why that is. Because Snarf has to break in, get the door open, and then enter. It also had one of the few instances where they reused footage from the intro.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah, that was obvious.
But they did change Mum-Ra's transformation. They didn't reuse his like bandages flying off when he does his epic speech.
Yeah. But I think it's neat that like all the Thundercats were gearing up to kick his face in while he's doing his incantation. That was a really good shot. Like those were really well compositioned shots. But we're going to go ahead and go into what the book says about all this. Snarf takes up the challenge. The most surprising thing about Snarf takes up the challenge is how enjoyable it is. While Snarf certainly earned his place in the Thundercats series, providing necessary comic relief, an episode with him in a strange role may have been destined for mediocrity. Confounding this expectation, Peter Lawrence delivers a wonderfully exciting episode, fully justifying Snarf's place in the Thundercats team. The episode begins with a lonely scene of Cat Slayer as Snarf tries in vain to locate the fellow Thundercats. The eerie image sets up the tone perfectly, and it must surely be a child's greatest nightmare that one day their parents will be gone and they will be left alone. As with one of the previous episodes, Mongor, Lawrence cleverly opens the action halfway through the adventure, making the most of the short-running theme. His flashback scenes feature imaginative traps as, one by one, the Thundercats are snared. With each scenario, the adage, curiosity killed the cat, comes into play, as each member falls foul of his or her inquisitive nature. As with many of Lawrence's episodes, the script feels effortless and flows at a perfect pace. There are plenty of novel moments, including the mutants' ingenious use of the Eye of Thundera projector. From the production side, look out for more unusual scene transitions, such as the interlocking triangles during the Thundercats trap, and a determined battle between Mum-Ra and Lion-O in the Black Pyramid that utilizes pre-photographed stills of Lion-O from the opening credits. Where the episode really excels is in the surprise revelation of the mummified Thundercats entombed in Mum-Ra's pyramid. Lion-O's eyes alone tell the story, watching Mum-Ra's every move with terror, and his narrative choice is a touch of genius from Lawrence, who once again displays his prowess with the dialogue, "We'll bully the Burbles, we'll terrorize the Talbots, whip the Wollos, smash the snowmen," declare the mutants. The episode's climax, where Snarf's newfound friend spins a web around Mum-Ra's sarcophagus, is cleverly conceived, and the Thundercats bursting out of their wrappings as they praise Snarf, "You underestimate the seventh Thundercat," is exhilarating. While Mum-Ra's weakness, the reflection of his own evil, has never been particularly imaginative, it can just about be justified when used sparingly. Snarf Takes Up the Challenge is, in many ways, an allegory for the challenge the script editor, Peter Lawrence, was facing. to integrate a sometimes unpopular minor character and utilize him as the lead protagonist. His success in this endeavor is evident. Writer's commentary from Peter Lawrence. I never much liked Snarf, who seems to me to be the obligatory comic character, and who, incidentally, was originally drawn with the little butthole dot, so that in shots he was walking from the camera, there was that dot instantly censored. Perhaps by Script 25, and in view of my own bias, he wasn't getting enough airtime, and so, I believe, Jules asked me to write a short starring him. I wanted to make him more of a token ha 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 figure, the constant naysayer too, and therefore challenged him to be heroic. In doing so, added another dimension to his character. So yeah, it was basically just done to give Snarf a little bit more screen time. But let's see if we got any questions here. John, he deleted the message, but yes, this absolutely does justify Snarf. And anybody who thinks he's useless, this episode pretty much debunks him. Huge missed opportunity.
A lot of his appearances would debunk that. Like just the last episode would have debunked that.
Doesn't that one kid from Captain Planet had the ability to communicate with all animals? I don't remember if Mati was able to communicate with them or if he was able just to sense their emotions. One's inherently more powerful than the others. There's a difference between looking at a dolphin and saying, "Oh, you're sad," and you know that giant killer whale, go eat that boat. It's a bit different. Yeah. All right, so if we don't have any other questions from the chat, we can go ahead and move on to our character retrospective before we get into the comic, and that character retrospective will be of poor old Vultureman. So let me go ahead and get the images and throw them up here if I can find out where I put them. Aha. And I willingly chose images of him being more expressive because why not? So, Mark, you are really fond of this character, so I'll let you go first on your thoughts on him.
I love that guy, Vultureman. He's my favorite mutant. I like him that he is the most competent mutant, but he's not the leader. And I think like Slythe knows that Vultureman is better than him. And so that's why he keeps Vultureman under his thumb, because Vultureman keeps creating all these inventions that should win. He created a Thundranium cannon that literally I just saw the pictures. Those are great. I mean, he cracks me up just looking at him. The animators, I feel like the animators liked him best too, because they do stuff like that with him all the time, where he's got the expressive teeth, but only when he needs them. Sometimes he doesn't have teeth and sometimes he does. He has the eyes and the very malleable brows, and he does a lot of physical comedy. He's a crack up. But just he made the Mutank. He made the Thundranium cannon. He made the freaking super power potion that allowed him to take over, pretty much beat up all the Thundercats by himself. And yet he's still the put upon like whipping boy of Slythe in the mutants, where he's always just being like browbeaten. And I feel so bad for him that this is a guy who under any other circumstances would win all the time, but he doesn't because the universe isn't fair. And he's great.
It's interesting to me that he was introduced later, and that like almost instantly they started using him for all of this physical comedy, and repeatedly. I think Mark nailed it, where he must be the animator's favorite or something, right? Because why else does it? Why else do they keep choosing him to do those kinds of scenes? I was reading this in like the Breath of the Wild art book, but they talked a lot about how having the villains have appeal makes the world maybe a bit more child friendly, or a bit more interesting to a child. If you even like the bad guys, then that means you're probably liking everything about the adventure story. And Vultureman definitely has a strong appeal to him. I even like how he has like that vulture ruffle just around his shoulders, but then everything else is humanoid. It's a bit, I don't know. He's kind of like an awkward kind of guy.
So there's one thing that I think proves how good he is. You mentioned that they introduced him later in the series. He wasn't with the mutants initially in Exodus, but they introduced him I think in like the snowman, the one with the snowman, but they point out that he built his flying machine, his ridiculous red bird-shaped flying machine. But that episode is before the one where the mutants retrieve all their vehicles and weapons from beneath the desert. So he's like Tony Stark. He built that thing with a box of scraps in a cave, like all the other mutants needed to go dig up their machinery and their weaponry from underneath the the desert. But Vultureman, he's like, nah, I got this. I'm just gonna make a giant red bird jet, using using all this
That
junk I
has
found on
to
Third
flap its arms.
It has to flap its arms to fly.
He's the one I'd be rooting for to do like a heel face turn if they ever continued Thundercats. You'd want to see Vultureman turn to the side of good.
Like, Vultureman has, like, that level of ego on par with Trey's Kushernada from Gundam Wing. Not only must I have a machine, it must look like me. Now, I love Vultureman as a character. I love when he goes on his tantrums, and what his tantrums mean, like, there's an episode where they are just heckling the piss out of him. He's like, you know what? Fine, you don't need me. And he breaks all their equipment. He's like, fine, you don't need to have anything I built either. Have fun, suckers. And he leaves. And all the mutants are reduced back to Stone Age weapons. And they're pissed, and it's great. And there's one scene, like in season 2, when they're realizing the Thundercats are leaving for Third Earth. So, like, what is it? Jackalman says, we should tell Slythe. And Vultureman goes, Slythe has never done anything for me. I'm going to the Lunatacs. And Jackalman's like, you're a traitor, Vultureman. You're a traitor to mutant kind. Vultureman goes, mutant kind has never done anything for me. It's great, and I love it. I love it. But here's what the book says about him. Vultureman, an evil genius and inventor, Vultureman was conceived as a member of the Mutants team from the very beginning of the series. However, while his colleagues debut in the pilot episode, his first appearance was held back until the subsequent adventure, Lord of the Snows, having been responsible for creating and reinventing the majority of the Mutants' arsenal. Vultureman spends the majority of the series plotting intricate plans to destroy the Thundercats, enjoying a tumultuous relationship with the mutant leader Slythe, who regards his schemes with skepticism. While his fellow mutants typically work well together, Vultureman is happy to freelance his skills to like-minded villains, including Rotaro and the Lunatacs, and he famously pilots the vehicle, the Flying Machine. Leonard's early show notes contain the following information about the Vultureman species. Vulturemen should have less costume as it would encumber them when they fly. They should also have a kind of helmet to go with their beaky, but also recognizably human, faces. Their necks, however, are long and capable of the type of mobility that long-necked birds have. They are scruffy-looking with the kind of feathery collar that vultures have. Their wings, rather than sticking out of their backs the way angels' wings are usually depicted, are folded across their bodies when not in flight. So that's kind of like the way the gargoyles were. That's kind of neat. Granted, it's never got translated. The way real birds do. They carry lances with a crude medieval design and possibly a variation on other mutant shields. The Vulturemen speak with a croak. Their laugh resembles the crow's caw-caw-caw. They squawk if hurt. Vultureman appears in 40 episodes and is the last mutant to be featured, outlasting his teammates with the final appearance in the series, with the series' penultimate installment, Matthew Malick's The Zax Factor. So it seems like his design in pre-production was much different. And maybe that could be explored in another more competent series continuing, because it seems like they were supposed to be capable of flight and all this other stuff. But let me see if I can pull this up here.
That's kind of weird because he had the wings in the Thundercats reboot from 2010, but he didn't have them obviously in the original series.
Yes, but Matthew Malick, who wrote The Zax Factor, later says, by the way, you'll have to ask Peter Lawrence to verify this, but to me, it seemed that Vultureman was clearly gay, and in fact the only gay mutant in the bunch.
Okay. I don't think we ever saw a female mutant. I mean, maybe they're all gay.
No, it's just, I can understand why he'd get that, because Vultureman's kind of on his own, somewhat, and picked on regularly by the mutants. But if you have a gay friend, they tend to be extremely competent, surrounded by morons, and unfortunately, Vultureman sits right in the middle of that. But let me go ahead and go on to the comments here. Let's see here. Vultureman is
I just
best.
have a quick question,
Go ahead.
though. So in that write-up, he kept talking about like the Vulturemen as a species. Did we ever see more Vulturemen besides Vultureman?
We
No,
never saw a
so.
single extra one. We see of them of all the other mutants except for Rotaro and Vultureman.
Okay, I just wanted to confirm that.
All right, so Vultureman is best boy by Vero Veteracy. True. Vultureman is great. Also true. Justin Thomas, because if Vultureman was the leader, he'd be like Skeletor surrounded by bumbling buffoons. I mean, that's not wrong. Need a fan fiction where Vultureman takes over as mutants and successfully takes down the Thundercats. Not my dig. I don't write fan fiction. Vultureman versus Panthro. Panthro, because Vultureman's tech unfortunately does break, and Panthro's tech wouldn't dare break down on him. Built in a box thing with a box in a cave. The box of scraps. Rather see him given a redemption arc and some other options I put. That wouldn't be too bad. I think out of all the mutants, Vultureman probably would be the good heel turn because, oh my god, I am on the losing side constantly. I'm smarter than this.
I think he just wants to be appreciated, and obviously Slide and the other mutants are never going to appreciate his genius and the things he builds. And if just once, maybe, the Thundercats were like, after they defeated him, like, hey, good try, Vultureman. That thing you built was really cool, by the way. Maybe Vultureman would be like, oh, really? Well, I could maybe hang out with you guys sometime.
Notice me, Thundercat Senpai.
Exactly.
It's all right.
Like,
We'll get a game going of like Thundercats kart, where somehow they get together for go-karting on the weekends. But,
oh my god, yes.
All right. So unfortunately, the fun is now out of the way, and now we get to cover, well, something we've covered on the channel before, something that I'm sure will keep coming back. I blame Marmaduke for this because for some reason he heard last month when I said Thundercats Superman crossover, he thought it was Thundercats He-Man crossover. So we're covering the first and second issues of this crossover on the show. We've done it again before, both with Joe and Tyler, but we have a new cast here, so let's go ahead and get their thoughts. Marmaduke, since this was your oopsie, go ahead and give us your thoughts on issue 1.
So I tortured myself, and I actually read the entire series in one sitting. So I thought I was like ahead of the homework last month, but I'm just getting the sense that the Thundercats and He-Man seem to have a really hard time getting a good crossover, and I feel like every good crossover is going to have certain, common plot points show up. Like I always want to see the heroes fight in the crossover. I always want to see the villains, butt heads against one another in the crossover. Then I want to see the heroes team up and beat the two villains in a crossover, right? So I feel like He-Man Thundercats has that structure, and then it doesn't have it doesn't have much respect for either cast of characters, but it definitely like disrespects He-Man for most of the series. And I feel like it's got the problem of like the writer just started with the basic like, oh, this is the classic superhero team up plot, so I'll just follow that, and then I'll throw in some like snide, smart alecky 80s corny gags. And I don't think that's how you do 80s corny humor, because 80s corny humor comes from the fact that the characters are really, really sincere while being in the midst of like a ridiculous situation.
They didn't know it was corny.
Yeah. Or maybe they felt it was. It's corny in the way a child's story is corny. Like children aren't trying to be stupid on purpose. They're telling you a story with lots of ridiculous things that are very funny, and the kids think it's really, really cool. And in a way, it kind of is. At the same time, you're laughing. The art, though, by Freddie E. Williams II, I just love that. So this would win an award for if you erase the words in the speech bubble balloons and then like write your own comic. This could be a really good comic, actually, if you just go by Freddie E. Williams' art.
That was the first thing I
guess,
thought too. Yeah.
Like spoiler warning, I've only like watched one episode of He-Man in my life, so I found out that there is this thing where when he's Prince Adam, he's kind of more cowardly, and there's this secret that he's He-Man, right? So the reason no one suspects that Prince Adam is He-Man is because He-Man's so heroic, and Prince Adam they don't think he'd be that heroic. But I just feel like they were clowning on him. Like he's late to his own coronation. Everybody's like mad at him and calling him an idiot. Like his dad shows him a belt, and He-Man says, is it a belt? Like keep your pants up, right? Like give the guy a little dignity, please. Lion-O, they came close, I thought, to getting a feel for the character, because like they make the point that he's a kid in mind still, but I feel like, I don't know, like he overemphasized that. Like Lion-O starts growing up pretty quickly, even in the early episodes of Thundercats, and the Thundercats never like dunk on Lion-O and saying, you're such an immature brat, Lion-O, you've got to be more mature. Like they tend to teach Lion-O by like giving him positive reinforcement when he does something good, and when he's being an idiot, they tend to sort of like remind him of what his duties as a lord are. But I don't see like the older Thundercats parenting style isn't like I never imagined them saying like, you suck, Lion-O, and there is kind of like a you suck, Lion-O moment in this, so not that good.
Yeah, I've got my own thoughts, but I'm going to let Mark go ahead since I subjected him to this earlier today.
So I'm guessing we're going to be doing these over the next 3 Thundercats, the next 2 Thundercats, because I only read the first 2 issues.
Yeah, we're doing 1 and 2, then we're doing 2 and 3, then 3, or then we're doing.
Oh, I didn't know what I was signing this up for. Wait a minute.
Too bad. Yeah. It's not your fault, Marv. Continue.
I blame Marmaduke personally, but
You do.
no. So what Marm said, it was 100% true. I like Freddie E. Williams' art and Jeremy Caldwell's colors. I like it a lot. Visually, I think this comic, if it didn't have any words, it might be a good comic. And it's funny because the digital copy that I read, two of the pages are actually missing the lettering. It has empty speech bubbles, and
That
those are the
that
best two
that
pages in the comic.
that may have been my oopsie. Sorry.
That's fine, but it made a good contrast. It was what made me think that, hey, if I could just erase the words that are there and just fill in and caption in my own dialogue and narration, maybe this would actually read a lot better. But yeah, the plot is, I mean, there is a rhythm, like Marm said, to these crossover plots. Heroes meet each other, they fight, they realize they're on the same side, they team up. I mean, it's stock standard. So I know have an expectation going into it. It's just the writing is so bad. The dialogue from the characters is so self-aware, and it becomes obnoxious. And especially Skeletor, he doesn't sound like Skeletor. He does all these little asides, these self-aware asides and little remarks, and he uses slang, and it just doesn't sound like I'm trying to read it with like Alan Oppenheimer's voice in my head, or there's the standard, Skeletor kind of voice, and it just doesn't scan. Uh, Mumra, I guess, was written a little better. He doesn't have much dialogue in the first two issues. The Thundercats seem to be written a little better, at least in the issues I read. But yeah, the Masters, they're lousy. Uh, Especially like Adam, like Marmaduke pointed out, they really go overboard with him being a worthless simpleton, which is supposed to be an act that he puts on, so nobody realizes that Clark Kent is Superman. No one realizes Adam is He-Man. But there's a part where the sorceress just shows up and she's like, "Hey, yo, He-Man, can I have your sword?" And he's like, "Here's my sword," and then she stabs him with it immediately, and it happens in the span of like 1.5 pages, and it's I don't know, it's just lousy. And there's a lot of like blood in the comic, which it gives me flashbacks to the Wildstorm Thundercats comics that were trying so hard to be edgy and
Yep.
mature. And like, I don't want to see that. If you're taking two Saturday morning cartoons, and you want it to feel authentic, then you have to play by the rules of the Saturday morning cartoons, and that means like there's no gore and there's no cursing and there's no outrageous sex appeal, that kind of stuff. Otherwise, it just looks like fan fiction and fan art. And yeah, no, these aren't good comics, and I am not looking forward to reading the rest of it.
Well, that's your thoughts for issue one. How about you, Mom? You got anything additional to say?
The only scene I really liked is when He-Man put his hands on the sword and said, "I have the power." And the reason I like that is it took a key phrase from He-Man and used that in a heroic context. So I guess that is kind of an example of what was annoying Mark, because it's violating the Saturday morning cartoon. It was like I've been rewatching Gummy Bears, and I'm just like totally flabbergasted by how good it is and how I missed it. But they do things like they would suggest the evil of the villain without putting it in your face. So like this villain in Gummy Bears wants to capture someone to be his singing slave, and he says the last one didn't last very long, and you think, oh, she died, right? But they don't like show you like a skeleton, right, and shove that in your face, because they want 3-year-olds to watch it, right? So I feel like Prince Adam, getting his butt kicked by Mum-Ra and then summoning the power and laying the smackdown on Mum-Ra is potentially a good scene. But yeah, like respect. You have to actually like care about what it came from enough to have what you write feel consistent with the world it's set in. And even if you did want to do like a more mature alternate take on the characters, you still have to love the original enough to at least want to capture that. Like if it's more bloody, more violent Thundercats and He-Man, at least it should be more bloody, more violent Thundercats and He-Man, where I don't know, you're capturing maybe like the moral strength of the
Well,
characters. You definitely don't like clown on it and say, oh, ancient
yeah.
evil spirity guys, right?
God, that does not sound like Skeletor when he's. That kind of dialogue is what I was talking about, where it just made me rage trying to read that. But you point out that actually is a somewhat clever scene where, I mean, so he Prince Adam is stabbed and impaled with the power sword, and Mum-Ra asks him, "Any last words?" And he says, "I have the power," and then he's transformed to He-Man, which heals his wounds. And like, that's kind of clever because he is touching the power sword when he says, "I have the power." The power sword's like touching his kidneys, but it works. The logic scans. But that's the kind of scene that save that scene for issue 6. Don't put it in issue 1. Make that the big impact moment. It's like you can have those violent moments, but they have to be a surprise. It's like G.I. Joe the movie, when Duke gets impaled by Serpentor's snake and there's this huge gush of blood. That had so much impact because after like 65 episodes of the TV series that did not have blood and guts and gore in it, to have that one moment in a movie, to have that kind of like sudden surprise violence in it, you remember that. It holds with you. But when you're reading a comic like this, where every time someone gets punched, they throw up a huge glob of blood and there's just teeth everywhere, and people getting cut and ground up, like who cares if He-Man gets impaled? It's no less violent than any of the other crap we're seeing in the comic. Yeah.
All right, so I'm going to go ahead and go into my issues here. Firstly, none of the characters are written properly. While Prince Adam is a little bit more laid back due to having to hide an identity, he's never insensitive to what his parents want, and he'd never speak to his father like that about something that important. This is the king of Eternia in my bedroom, my father, asking me about the importance of a family belt. He'd never make a joke about, is it to keep your pants up? The problem with this is, and Mark, this is going to hurt you more. The people who wrote this, the executive director of this line, is Larry Goldfine. The guy
I recognize that name.
2003 TMNT. He's listed as one of the writers for every script.
Such a good job on that show, and I don't know what the hell happened for him to screw up this bad on this comic. I was going to blame it on the other guy, the other writer.
Well, the other writer, whose name I can't recall right now, he worked on the He-Man New 52 Eternity War run, which was garbage in and of itself. But what they're doing here is they're trying to play we're self-aware, we know all these things. But here's what they've dicked up. Number one, Jaga shows up, and let me go ahead and throw this into the chat so you guys can keep up with the rest of everybody else. Jaga shows up. Everybody's able to see him for some asinine reason. Basic understanding of Thundercats, from even a basic research point of view, tells you, no, that's not what happens. Now, let's see here. What else do I have? All right, so they decided that for some asinine reason, they needed to give Mum-Ra a new power. Now, why they decided to do this, I don't know. It could have been neat, except that they just used it and wrote it in there so he could find out who He-Man was. Despite Mum-Ra having a scrying pool where he just has to watch long enough. And speaking...
Yeah, I didn't even realize that Mum-Ra, he doesn't need a new power to look into He-Man's mind and know that he's Prince Adam. He can just look in his damn cauldron of purple water and see like, oh, there he is. Okay, he's transforming. Oh, that's it.
Well, not just that. It's like they give him the ability to tear open a hole in space-time throughout the universe. Mum-Ra's never had that level of power. If he did, why would he need to find the power sword? He could have taken the Thundercats out early.
And they try to make you believe it by saying like, oh, he's about to like poop his pants doing this. Like that doesn't help me find this to be cool.
Well, you brought up the Jaga thing, and there's a line that Lion-O has when he's talking to Panther after Jaga shows up. And Lion-O says something that's so out of character. I don't have it on me right now, but he says like, "Why am I taking my orders from a sword and a ghost guy?" Ugh.
Yeah.
Like, Lion-O would not refer to Jaga that way. The ghost guy, the guy who died so you could live, who literally sacrificed his life, bringing you to Third Earth so you could survive. You don't call him the ghost guy. He's your mentor and basically your idol. It was just lousy writing.
And yeah, now I'm going to nitpick a little bit more here, but first, what's with the modern terminology? Especially when you pissed off of management. Just no. And again, I know you two are fond of William or the artist for this. I'm not. And the reason why I'm not is he can't even get Mum-Ra's look down. He gives Mum-Ra a skeleton face for some reason in both forms, and he's missing his cape completely. And I think I know why. You see, as I discovered when talking to people at Funko, when you do stuff like this, WB hands you your references. And here's what I'm going to get into before we go any further. Let's see.
What, you think they gave him a Funko doll and that was his reference?
No. I'm going to put this in the chat. So let me go ahead and grab that. I want you to take a look at the final thing. Now, this wound up getting revised after complaints, but at the final page of this issue, you have the Ancient Spirits of Evil around Mumra. The Ancient Spirits of Evil featured were the 2011 versions.
Oh, they effed that one up big time.
Instead of the artists looking for their own references, it seems like they are handed them. And these idiots couldn't even differentiate between the two versions. The people at Warner Brothers don't know what they're doing with these characters. Now, that's just one example. We can go a little bit further here. We can talk about how they don't know anything about He-Man either. So I'm going to go ahead and throw this in the chat, and then I'm going to throw it in here. So let me go.
It goes all the way to the top.
Well, kind of.
The highest levels of authority, the conspiracy to screw Thundercats is deep.
If you take a look at the page where the Sorceress shows up, fun thing about the Filmation or any other version of He-Man, the Sorceress in her human form cannot leave Castle Grayskull. That's
so why didn't He-Man? That should have been a big alarm in his head when he saw the Sorceress.
Yes, yes, it should have. It absolutely should have. But they don't even address it. It's never. They don't pay attention. And also, one thing I want you to notice, and this is a minor gripe: every character is left-handed.
Oh.
And we'll see that more.
What are the odds?
We'll see, I think William Friedel. What's his name? William, is that his name, or I can't remember what.
Freddie Williams.
Freddie Williams. I think he's left-handed. But let's see here.
Oh yeah.
So those are some of the issues that I have with the first issue. So let's go ahead and go into the second issue. All right, Marm, you go ahead and lead us on the second issue.
All right. Well, all of the problems from the last time carry over, and then this is the part I can't forgive. Like, is doing something pretentiously. Like, you can do a cool, like, oh, I'll do in media res, right? So like the bit of the narrator being an asshole, and then you realize the narrator is Skeletor. The first time I read that, I thought, okay, that's kind of cool. Like, Skeletor would be an asshole. He wouldn't like He-Man that much. And then, but after you do that, then every single one after that became like, hey, we don't know who this character is who's talking. But don't worry, at the very last page, we're finally going to reveal that it was Lion-O talking the whole time. Now, I guess the whole time I was reading this, there were moments where I was thinking, this could be good. This could be exciting, but the overall effect wasn't working. So one of the things that was working for me was I actually didn't mind the ancient spirits of evil being related to something within He-Man's universe, because I just kind of like these casts of characters together. Visually, they feel like they fit together. It would make sense to me if the Thundercats would, go exploring space and just find He-Man's universe. I like the looks of the He-Man villains teaming up with the mutants. The Monkeyan was weirdly off model for some reason. A lot of characters were pretty on model, and then Monkeyan was just like they flipped his colors around and gave him a beard. But yeah, so after kind of like my problems with issue 1, issue 2 is when it became clear to me that this is going to be like a pretentious thing where we kind of do like I'm going to show you what a cool writer I am by showing off my clever little twisteroo with the narrator, except that you've already spoiled the surprise with the first one, so it's not a surprise after that. I think this is the issue where they started like getting into the weird like what's the word for it? Queen Bee fight between He-Man's girl, I don't know her name,
Teela.
and Chitara. Teela. Yeah, and I just don't feel like the Thundercats are really good at teamwork. That's kind of their thing. So I feel like if there was ever tension between them and another group, it would be pretty just. You'd feel like there was a pretty justifiable reason for the tension. I never feel like Chitara would just like want to be like, oh, I'm gonna show I'm the top queen cheerleader to this.
That is not her personality at all.
Yeah.
Are you done, Marm?
Yeah, I think so. I'm sprigged out.
Oh yeah, you're kind of like taking a few breaths, like, oh, fuck this gummy.
Oh, it's gummy bears. Dang it.
This is the gummy way, Mom.
I mean, so issue 2 felt like 90% of that issue is just a fight scene between He-Man and the combined forces of the evil warriors and the mutants. And it's weird because it's not even all the evil warriors. It's just like Triclops, Trapjaw, Evil Lyn, and then the 4 mutants. And it's just a very thin, vacuous issue. I mean, it's fun because I like Freddie Williams' art. It was fun to see him drawing these fight scenes of these characters, but there's just nothing to it. And the banter between Skeletor and Mumra is just cringy and awful because, as pointed out, Skeletor is not written with the right voice. He says things, like "we've pissed off upper management," and it doesn't sound like him. It doesn't scan. It doesn't work. He gives that speech about how, and again, this is one of those things where, like, did the writer really do their research? Because he talks about the fifth uh, ancient spirit of evil, being the serpent god, whom Snake Mountain was made in the image of. This Snake Mountain literally is the serpent god. It's the body of Serpos that got transfixed as Snake Mountain, because Snake Mountain also used to be the headquarters of the Snake Men. That's all part of He-Man lore. And I'm not even the biggest He-Man fan. It's just something that even a novice knows. You can go to Wikipedia and look that up. It takes 5 seconds. And he's talking about how she doesn't exist anymore. Like she died. This god died a long time ago. I'm like, well, you're literally standing in her mouth right now. It just, it did not read very well with someone who has even a basic idea of who these characters are, what their voices should sound like, what their personalities are, how they should react to things. Before you even get to the mythologies of stuff, and this is another thing that kind of bugs me, is He-Man takes place in a time that's contemporaneous to present-day Earth, because Prince Adam's mother came from present-day Earth. She was an astronaut who wound up on Eternia. So it takes place in the present. The Thundercats take place in the distant future, because Third Earth is Earth way in the future. So, but they're acting like they're contemporaries, like Third Earth is a separate planet from that just happens to cross over, and that these characters are contemporaries. And like, no, because Third Earth is Earth, so there can't be two Earths at the same time.
Well, unless there's like some time travel shenanigans, right?
Well,
like,
on top of that,
I mean,
the people who did, they didn't even do much research with the Thundercat side, because at the end of the first issue, when Panthro reveals the Thunderstrike, two things. Number one, the Thunderstrike is from the second season, and they're trying to pretend like this is the Thundercats in the first season due to Lion-O's childishness. And secondly, the Thunderstrike isn't capable of space flight.
That's the feliner that does that, right?
Yes, and it had to be equipped to do so. Morons.
They just did not put enough effort into it, and it's so disappointing that you point out Larry Goldfine was the writer on this, because his writing on the 2003 Ninja Turtles cartoon was great. He wrote a lot of excellent scripts, and maybe they just had a great story editor on that show, but they were very consistent. They knew their Turtles lore. When they adapted the Mirage comics, they did an excellent job of doing it. None of that is present in this script.
So maybe like the key is like, do you care about the franchise? Because if you really love the Ninja Turtles and you get a chance to write the Ninja Turtles, like I'm gonna do that job right? But if I'm just like getting my like 80th script or whatever, just like, hey, do this for DC Comics, we're gonna do it across, okay, right? Like I think a good writer can phone it in on a property that they don't care about. But then it's a tragedy because they missed the opportunity of giving real fans of that property something that they would. It's like that like great I think Shigeru Miyamoto quote, like a delayed game is eventually good, a rushed game is bad forever.
Right.
Like a polished script is good forever, a rushed script is bad forever, right? Take some pride in it.
And I almost feel like maybe he was always bad, because in the 2003 Ninja Turtle show, the creative supervisor on that show was Peter Laird, and he had script approval. And he's put his notes on his blog, and he was savage on the scripts that were turned into him. And they went through serious overhauls, because a lot of the times the writing was really bad. And I kind of get the impression that the show was good, maybe not because of Goldfine, but because Peter Laird was there and not letting him put in bad scripts and be a shitty writer.
It really shows like the importance of the editing process. Like I got a feel from this reading Bakuman, where the editors like mostly care about making money, and so like there's this kind of like idea that the artist is this tragic figure, and if only the editors would let the artist be artists. But sometimes the editors know what they're talking about because they know what the readers want, and sometimes they can give the artist like or the writer really, really good practical advice about how to think practically about the craft of writing. So yeah, if you have like a Laird editing something, it can kind of like rein in the shenanigans of a writer. So I just would never I wouldn't worship my editor if I was in that kind of relationship, but I would at least like really respect their role, even if I thought I as the artist had like these great creative ideas.
A balance when it comes to having an editor, because sometimes you have the editor who's just a complete incompetent, who pushes bad ideas, and you see this all the time over at the big two, Marvel and DC Comics, where the editors, will push for these terrible events and these terrible miniseries, and the books are never good. But then you have sometimes where the writer artist doesn't want to do what the editor does, but the editor pushes them anyway, and the end result is more that they pushed the creator to do something better, to plus what they've already done, to use a Disney term. So like the Dragon Ball manga, Akira Toriyama, his design for the first batch of androids were Android 20 and 21, the old man and the fat guy. And the editor said, no, those are terrible. Make new androids. And so he made android.
And he didn't like Semi-Perfect Cell, right? He thought Semi-Perfect Cell looked like an idiot.
Exactly. And so he kept telling him, like, no, make a new cell. And so the first cell was a reptilian monster. And so it's like, okay, here's the next cell. Like, no, that cell has dumb lips. Make a third cell. And so he made Perfect Cell, and that was a great design. He kept pushing Toriyama to do something better, and Toriyama did. But if he hadn't had that editor who was pushing him, we would have ended up with old man and fat guy android and just the insect reptilian cell, and wouldn't have gotten the better characters and the better designs. So yeah, editors can and do improve the books they're on, but they have to be good editors, and like everything else in the world.
You hope they didn't get promoted to their level of incompetence, basically.
Pretty much, yeah. I mean, a lot of the times editors are people who, they're almost like studio executives at Hollywood, and those are the kinds of editors you don't want, where they're just trying to look at what's popular out there and say, hey, copy that, or they're trying too hard to maximize profit, where there's like, okay, we need like 12 tie-ins to this year-long maxi series event. The DC and Marvel editors, that's the kind of editor you don't want.
Okay, so my rage about this issue is a few things here. First and foremost, Larry or Goldfine, the other people, they didn't research anything. This is clearly just a thrown together tie-in to try to appeal to nerds from the 80s without any thought to it. Drinking Mumra's ashes are absolutely gross. I don't think it's something Skeletor would do. And you don't have to tie them together at the baseline. You can cross over things without having to connect them. Well, Sapphire was originally an ancient spirit. How does a spirit die, you idiot? These people don't know what they're doing, and unfortunately the majority of both the communities, Motu and Thundercats, ate it up because it has Thundercats and He-Man in it. No, you simpletons. Learn to criticize, learn to absorb and understand something, and be okay with saying this is garbage. Just because you say it's garbage doesn't mean you won't get things worse on or things later on. And if you do, they'll know better than to give you garbage. If you keep eating garbage, you're going to keep getting garbage because you're dumb enough to put up with it. Now, one thing that we're getting into later is everybody likes to praise this gentleman's art. But here's the problem. A lot of his art's based on the action figures. And you can see that with some of his muscle structure. This entire episode or this entire issue is garbage, and it doesn't get better from here. Congratulations, gentlemen. We're at the high point.
Thanks, Mom.
I was looking at that bicep on the cover, and there's something about that bicep. It's like wrapping around his arm entirely.
It's going to get worse, but we'll go ahead and conclude with the issues for here, and we're going to go ahead and start with our final thoughts. So next month, we're going to cover issues 3 and 4 for the He-Man Thundercats crossover. And let's go ahead and take a look at what episodes we're covering going forward here.
I will never misunderstand what comic we're reading again.
Yeah, you darn right you won't. Yeah, you better not. Anyways, next episodes are The Sixth Sense and Thundercutter. The Sixth Sense has not the best animation, but Thundercutter is one of my personal favorites as well. So
I'm looking forward to that.
Oh, it's going to be fun. So we were going to cover those episodes. So chat, guys, what hero character do you want us to cover?
Yeah.
You guys decide that while I go through the chat and read these things. Let's see here. Sounds like they're trying to sprinkle in memes. Maybe why I'm talking to sounds like roar dialogue. Yes, it does. My guess is that people want it in a certain way, and the writer was like, F my life. Well, I don't know. They look like they're going down a checkpoint or checklist at this point, maybe. So off the top of my head, the only comic book story where each issue was narrated from a different point of view that I liked was Superman for All Seasons. Unfortunately, we can't compare a really good book to things that suck. Poor snake goddess, crying face. A snake goddess worshipped by Sneeple. Another point for He-Man being Conan. You're not wrong. Let's see here. Editors aren't always the bad guys. You're right, they're not. Like, as Autobot Starscream says later, Takeuchi's creator helped make Sailor Moon what it ultimately became, and Sailor Moon was really good. And yes, nerds will analyze everything, but boomer nerds like me, like Pella Creepy, they don't tend to. They just consume. They're not very bright. I don't know why, but they're not. All right, so you two, what hero character do you think we should cover next time?
Have we done all the main Thundercats?
No.
Okay, who are we missing from the main Thundercats?
That's a good
I
question.
feel like we've done Wily Kit and Wily Cat, haven't we?
Yeah, we're missing Linkso, and we're missing Lion-O. I want to do Lion-O when we have Larry Kinney on.
Right.
And we haven't gotten to season 2 yet, so I'm still rewatching. I'm almost at the end of season 1, but I haven't gotten to season 2, so I'm not as familiar with the season 2 characters. I kind of need to refresh them in my memory before I talk about them.
You all need to get good.
I finished season 1. I finished the initiation trials.
Oh.
I'm doing okay.
Oh, look at you, Lio Convoy's pet. I finished season 1.
You will get no Marmaduke snacks yet. Not until you finish the series.
We did one on Hachiman, didn't we?
The Hachiman one was like 4 years ago when I started this, so we can go back and do them if you guys want to.
Yeah,
that would fit, right? Because then we would be doing the Thunder Cutter, right?
Sure, we'll go ahead and recover Hachiman. Have new guys on the cast.
Yeah, and by then, so Hachiman's in season 2, right?
Yeah, Hachiman's in season 1 and season 2.
Yeah. I watched at least another Hachiman episode before we do that, so I can talk about some of his other stuff that he did. And I know he's in like the when they go back to Thundera. I know he's in the double-headed Dragon of Doom. I never forgot that. That's the one where he
Hachiman
rides a horse through space.
Yeah, Hachiman's in the Thunder Cutter. He's in the 5-part Thundercats Ho. He is in the Jade Dragon of Doom. He's in Hachiman's Honor.
All right. Okay. So yeah, let's do Hachiman then, because he's got a lot of recurring roles, a lot of recurring episodes, and
sure.
He's a convoluted guy. I like him.
And yes, Starscream, we have covered Snarf before. Sword of Plundar versus the Glaive from Sailor Moon, Sword of Plundar is the weakest magical sword in the entirety of Thundercats. Granted,
destroyed a planet, I'll have you know.
True, but like the Glaive of Silence, didn't that wipe out more?
Yeah, that's true.
And ultimately, I think the Sword of a Plundar just caused the chain reaction as opposed to blowing up the planet itself. Not quite the same level. So I'd have to give it to the Glaive.
Did it on accident.
Yeah, I'd have to give it to the Glaive. But any other thoughts from the chat before we go ahead and close it out, since we've been at this almost 2 hours now?
Well, that's a good episode for us.
Yeah. We will wait for the chat to respond. Any thoughts, comments, questions, memery, or insults? We're open to all of them.
We are especially open to insults.
Yeah, just make it clever.
Oh, did you read Vankman's comment on editors?
Editor. Some writers really need a good editor to rein them in. Otherwise, they'll just run amok. Case in point, Dan Slott's 10-year run on The Amazing Spider-Man. The only Dan Slott Spider-Man I've ever read was like the finale he did, which I have on trade. I need to actually sit and read at some point. So, I mean, that might be a valid point. I don't know. All I know about Dan...
He like erased Peter Parker's consciousness at some point to replace it with Dr. Octopus's consciousness. He basically killed Peter Parker without quite killing him.
Well, I mean, once you get past one more day, you can't get much worse. So
yeah, no, they're screwed.
But his run started out promising because it started with the Gauntlet, which was just like bring back all these classic Spider-Man villains and make him literally run a gauntlet of having to fight all of them. And like, you know, it was a simpler plot, but it was still pretty good, to read. But then, you know, Spider Island, let's have everybody in New York get Spider-Man powers. Like, okay, and now Spider-Man is Dr. Octopus. And like, oh my god, this is getting bad.
In response to Starscream, so the Thunder Cutter is stronger than the Sword of Plundar? Yes, in fact, the Thunder Cutter actually cut the blades off the Sword of Plundar when they fought.
Damn, I can't wait to see that.
Yeah, Jade Dragon's a really good episode, just in general.
I always thought it was kind of messed up, though, that Mum-Ra is the one who got to wield the Sword of Plundar. It's like, you know, shouldn't shouldn't a mutant get to wield the sword of Plundar? It's kind of
Vultureman should wield the sword of Plundar. He's the chosen one.
Well, in fairness, he calls the Sword of Plundar, states the Sword of Plundar has murderous might. And the mutants, I mean, they're evil, but they're not quite on the same level of evil as Mumra is.
True.
And none of them really know anything about magic, so it makes sense that Mumra gets it. Not that it really ever did much, other than getting whooped all the time.
No, Thundercats really does remind me of a lot of 80s anime. Um, Not just aesthetically because it was animated in Japan, but do you remember Ronin Warriors on like Toonami?
I do.
Where they introduced the evil shogun character, but he had like his 4 shogun like generals, and like the first like 5 episodes they were a really big deal, and then they just became the comic relief henchmen bad guys, and then like newer, more powerful villains were introduced that showed them up. It's like this exact same thing as with the mutants. You know, the mutants were a force to be reckoned with at the start of the series, and then they kind of just turned into jokes. And the Lunatics showed up, and the Lunatics showed them up, and like the Lunatics were a big deal. And then I just kind of remember them, you know, Sky Tomb crashes later on, and the Lunatics are just kind of lame. It does follow the same sort of progression of things like that, and that a lot of anime from the 80s did.
Correct. But, you know, it was just a toy commercial, guys. Just a toy commercial.
Yeah, I know. We're taking it too seriously.
We should just like all the cartoons and buy all the products and not say anything bad.
You know, I actually had a guy on the ThunderCast page try to play that game with me today, and he got real mad when I got ugly. Like, why are you insulting me? Like, don't be stupid. You won't get insulted.
Now, next time someone says "Okay, boomer" to me, I'm just gonna say, "Better a boomer than a consumer."
Oof.
Do.
Well, the fun thing about "Okay, boomer" is it only works if that's your opening line. At any other point, it's just you clearly lost ground and you don't know how to respond, so you just make fun of them for that.
It's as bad as saying "check your privilege," and you think that means you drop the mic because you won the argument. Yeah. It's something
I will defend the boomer meme to my dying breath. That is what's funny about it is that's the first time I've ever heard there's the classic kids these days and their cartoons and things were better when we were kids and we actually read books and played outside, right? And okay, boomer is like the first time I've ever heard someone like actually have a snappy comeback to that.
all this discussion makes me think of this old like web comic from like 15 years ago, and it was like the 85-year-old boomer, and there's these 2 old man and woman, this grandpa and grandpa, like rocking in chairs on the porch, and the grandma's like, "Do you remember the birth of our first child?" And the old man's like, "No. Do you remember Thundercats? That show was awesome." I feel like that's gonna be me.
God. Who is superior, Samurai Jack or Hachiman? Well, while I love Samurai Jack is trained in almost every form of hand-to-hand and weapon combat. Their swords, I'd say, are probably about equal. So it would come down to their own physical ability, and as much as I hate to say it, Hachiman's kind of a meta-human. The dude literally just using his biceps choked out a demonic bat dog. And then fell from freaking the stratosphere to the earth unscathed.
Jack can get his ass kicked. You know, like I love the down he had with that one weird blue guy who was guarding the time machine.
Yeah.
Like that blew my mind how bad Jack lost that fight.
I feel like Jack took a really long time to beat Aku. I mean, not just talking, you know, the fact that seasons 4 and 5 are separated by like 15 years, but the fact that it took him 5 seasons to save the day. Like, what does Hachiman do? He kicks Mamura's ass in like his second appearance. I mean, I don't think Hachiman would have taken so long to beat Aku.
No, Hachiman has an anger issue that Jack doesn't tend to.
But I also feel like this is a problem with the end of Samurai Jack in general, is that if Jack had honor, he wouldn't have gone back in time and to defeat Aku, because doing so erased all of his friends from history. And, you know, he killed uncountable trillions in doing so, or did
But
worse
how
than
but
kill
how
him.
much does he know that? Like I've always thought that Jack doesn't seem to understand time travel at all.
Yeah, but
Otherwise,
Hachiman, I think, would. I don't think Hachiman would have gone back in time to do that. He would have understood that if I go back in time and if I defeat this great evil so the future never existed, then all these friends I met along the way will cease to exist as well,
Well,
and that would be wrong.
in fairness, Hachiman's also literally as old as Mumra is.
I figure Hachiman's probably, if he's not a time traveler, I don't know what the heck he is.
He's too powerful and too angry to die.
there's a really good comic that was the ending, a ending for Samurai Jack before they brought it back, and they just had the idea that he loses all the time. He loses all the time travel portals, so he just he decides he can't change the past. So all he can do is defeat Aku and create peace going forward, which I thought was a really like moving, like Lion King. You can't change the past type of story. I don't know that I did love that they finally came back and finished it. I'm still like mulling over my thoughts about. I probably got to rewatch all of Samurai Jack to decide whether I like season 5 as a closer to it.
Yeah, I liked parts of season 5. I didn't like it as a whole, and I do
Yeah.
think that ending from the comic that's decanonized now, but that was he had to sacrifice something for that ending to happen. He had to realize I can never go back to the past, but I can save the present,
Mm-hmm.
and that's it. That's a bitter pill to swallow. But in the way they ended it in the actual cartoons, he goes back to the past, with what's her face, Ashi, and then it's so dumb because they're at their wedding, and then she's like falls over and
Yeah.
she's like, "Oh right, because you erased the future, I can't exist." Blah,
Right.
and then
I
dies and
feel like
disappears.
so this ties into something we talked about earlier. I feel like when Jendi had all the control for himself, like it's a very different vibe than when anybody can write a story and anyone can introduce something into Jack. And one of the things I love about Thundercats is because these writers have different interests, they're bringing different things into the world, and that's clearly what happened to Jack. Is people who loved robots wrote robot episodes, and people who loved Spartans wrote Spartan episodes, and it is kind of an indicator that maybe like a group of creative artists can create something that just wouldn't occur to like one artist or one writer. Like one artist or one writer, they want to give it one singular creative vision, and then I think some of the great stuff from the original series kind of got like brushed under the rug in the rush to like wrap it all up and tie a bow on it. But
And, yeah.
Go ahead.
Oh, so the last season, I mean, you can tell that Gendy, he's an amazing artist. He's an amazing director, storyboarder. I don't think he's a great script writer though,
Yeah.
because he had to do like a 13-part miniseries, basically a serialized narrative, and the ideas he was coming up with, they felt like something so simple and out of fan fiction almost. Like Ashi as a character, she's Aku's daughter who has Aku's powers, but she's also in love with Jack, but she doesn't know if she should be in love with Jack or not because that's the enemy. That kind of like, oh my god, that feels like a fan fiction character, like a self-insert for, the writer. It's so cringy. I didn't like her as a character. I didn't like her arc, and the ending, like I pointed out, is like it didn't occur to Gendy that going back in time kills everybody that he erased from history. And he doesn't realize. And I guess you're right. Jack didn't
I just
understand
want
that because Ashi dies, and he's like, "Oh, I didn't
Right.
think about that."
More
I just erased
importantly,
you from history,
a
too."
real easy way to fix that is just make convergent timelines.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Or literally make that fans Rick and Morty comic canon where Rick just shows up and says, "Yeah, that didn't make any sense. Anyway, I got you an Ashi from another timeline."
Good God.
uh,
We don't talk about Rick and Morty. Anyways, let's see here.
Are we live? Or are we still just shooting
No,
the
we're
shit?
live. We're still live.
Oh.
All right, so let's see
Shooting the
here.
shit.
Let's see here. We had a little conversation in the chat about Hachiman himself. Venkman is glad Dan Slott's finally gone. I saw Dan Slott on Twitter. Don't really care for him as a person. Let's see here. Tim thinks Sailor Moon and Thundercats would be a good crossover. Depends on how it's handled. Yes, Autobot Starscream. I remember when Hachiman stomped one of the ancient spirits of evil. That was in the episode The Jade Dragon. Especially if it's a manga instead of being handled by WBDC. It all depends on how it's handled, because manga doesn't tend to do crossovers, even in native Japan very often. So you'd have to get competent people who...
Or unless it's like two like girls from a shoujo
Yeah.
manga who
You'd
are
have to get
looking at
somebody-
the doe eyes at the boy.
You'd have to get somebody competent in the understanding of Thundercats and competent in the understanding of Sailor Moon. And again, I'm open to hire. I know both very well. So, pitching myself. But yeah, it would be difficult to find somebody WB would hire in those instances because they don't tend to outsource. They tend to only work in-house. Then you'd have to get, the licensing for Sailor Moon behind it, and good luck with that.
Viz, is it Viz that has the current licensing rights in the U.S. for Sailor Moon?
Yes.
I think they did a redub of everything. I think, yeah. Maybe you have to work with them, but you can't step on their toes. You have to look over those contracts, that kind of crap. It's almost more trouble than it's worth. I think most executives would feel.
That'd be kind of an out there crossover. But as that is, we're going to go ahead and say our goodbyes for now. Go ahead and lead us out, guys. I'd like to thank our patrons, and I'd like to thank, of course, Comic Basics. And you can catch Marmaduke in the channel listed below. And I don't have one yet for Pelt Creepy. I think he tends to hang out with the Bunderdome lot. So just Google those guys. You'll find him. You guys have a good night.
Hey, and Back Common America, written by Mark.
Oh yeah, I made a comic. Please back my comic. I'm so hungry.
Yeah, if you like boobies, go ahead and hit up Mark's comic.
Oh, who doesn't?
All right, so you guys have a good night.
Thank you.